Welcome to Cognitive Liberty. I'm your host, Clyde Lewis. This show is brought to you by TLBTV and the Liberty Beacon Project. Hey everybody, it's Clyde Lewis. I'm here, the host of the Cognitive Liberty Show, and it's right here on the Liberty Beacon TV network. We're so glad to be here today, and I'm very proud to have a great guest on my show, of course, Rob Davenport. Everybody knows who Rob Davenport is. He's a very well-known producer. He has been involved with a lot of informative projects like the Conspiracy Channel and now FreeJack TV, which of course is a new project that I want to be a part of. I think everybody wants to jump on board and be a part of it. And of course, the Jungle Apocalypse, where he talks about some of the things I love talking about. That's anomalies and weird stuff. That's what we do. But today, Cognitive Liberty is, pretty much, Rob, we have talked about many times on this show some of the things that I think when you talk about cognitive liberty, you're talking about the mind. You're talking about what are some of the things that are invading our mind right now? What are some of the things that are bringing us down? And I was talking last night about this overall feeling of what I call the trauma paradigm. And I think this is a precursor to what you've talked about before, and that's the sixth extinction event, where animals in the animal kingdom, a lot of them, elephants, others, mothers, of course, of their cubs, they sense something is about to go down. And when that happens, either they prepare, or they eat their young, or they hide their young, or they go somewhere and hide to die. And I'm getting this feeling that with the trauma paradigm, and I'm calling it the trauma paradigm because that's without any other thing to call it, I think we're experiencing this trauma paradigm because I think all of us have this idea that perhaps we are slowly being worked out of the picture. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I'd agree. With me, it started when I was young. I remember being, 4, 5, 6 years old and looking around and seeing news reports and thinking, wow, something's not right. Like something in my lifetime is going to change. And then by the time I got to be 32, 33, I started reading about this thing called the sixth extinction, which is, we've had 5 previous mass extinctions. The last one that would be the dinosaurs that everybody knows about, asteroid, volcanic eruptions. Now they've added climate change to the end of that. And now we're at a point where we're losing species on this planet at 100 times the rate that they did previously during the last extinction. Now, everybody's saying it's mankind. I don't agree with that. I think we've hit a natural cycle. I think that's we're probably going to see things like more asteroid impacts like we saw over Russia a few years ago, more earthquakes, more volcanoes. I think this is a lot deeper than just losing species on the planet.
I remember back when, and I've been doing this for a long time, talking about these types of things, human behavior and the human psyche, and how a group of individuals prepare for what could be the end of the world. I don't think there's going to be an abrupt end. I think we have these slow end times phases, like what's going on with the situation in the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. But I have discussed many times that we have some sort of cellular memory of an extinction event. And what I mean by this, if you read like Worlds in Collision by Immanuel Velikovsky and several others, they've talked about this idea of cellular memory. And what that is, for example, they say that survivors of concentration camps, the situation with the Nazis, that their progeny, that the ones born after these survivors apparently still have that trauma in them, and they didn't even experience it. Okay, their forefathers or grandfathers and great grandfathers and grandmothers experienced it. Their great uncles and great aunts experienced it, but they didn't experience it, and yet they still have the trauma. They still have these traumatic experiences and cellular memory of these things. And there's always this theory, there's always been this theory, that the reason why we fear the end of the world is because our ancestors, as you were pointing out quite well, is that our ancestors have experienced extinction events And what's interesting is that when we talk about the end of the world, there's always, and I always say this, God in his infinite wisdom has always provided witnesses to these events. And that's why we hear about the end of the world. That's why if you read the book of Genesis in the Bible is not the beginning. It's the remaking of what was destroyed before. And so, for some reason, just out of, one segment of the timeline, we decided to begin at what? The fifth extinction or the fourth extinction. And then we have another one with, I guess, Noah, if you believe in that. But who was the civilization that witnessed that? It was the Sumerians, because they write in their tablets. There was a huge flood on the planet. And of course, that goes against everything Christians believe, because they believe that everything was destroyed, but everything wasn't destroyed. There was the Sumerians and other groups that said, yeah, there was a huge flood on one part of the world, probably a big upset, some huge upheaval. And like I say, there's always somebody to witness these extinctions.
Well, I mean, it's similar to, I guess, if you look at some of the native cultures around here, and they're telling of history through various stories and fables, and they're even here. Like I'm in the Northwest Territories, as you probably remember. Our native population has only had contact with people for maybe 150 years. My wife's father's parents grew up not knowing what a white man was until they were in their 60s. So they might have seen one or two explorers come through, but they never actually had immersion in the culture.
Right.
So we're still able to go out and hear these fables, and they talk about these massive cataclysmic changes and how they had to hide in the mountains and caves, and floods coming across the land, and these massive animals that obviously existed. We know now during the previous ice age, or just prior to. And these are all fables that we have here that I can hear on a regular basis. So obviously there is some sort of recent event. I don't know if it was the fifth extinction or if it was the flood of Noah or what it was, but it seemed to happen at the same time. And a lot of these places had written about it. And if you look at some of the things they talk about, like the declining moral situation among the world and whatnot, it all happened about the same time. And I find it really interesting that we're having these exact same issues today.
If you go in Utah, places in Utah have these ancient hieroglyphs, I guess. They're the Indians, or they're the native people of these areas that have actually drawn on the caves and on the rocks certain images. And David Talbot, who is a known scientist, catastrophist, he of course is a Velikovskian, I call him. Thunderbolts.info is the place to go for that. He told me an interesting, he has this interesting theory, and that is, when you look at these cave, glyphs, okay, and you notice that in the glyphs, they have this like aura around their head, or they have lightning coming out of their head, or they have all this stuff coming out of their head. Those who would be in the ancient alien thought, that's obviously ancient aliens they're drawing. He has another theory that I think is even more intriguing. And while this doesn't discount any ancient alien, intervention or infiltration or any like that, what it depicts is a time in history where the poles shifted. And when the poles shifted, you notice that the glyphs on the walls that were painted by these native peoples didn't show too many animals. And when it did show human beings, or those human beings, they're mostly stick figures, and they see like these little lightning bolts coming out of their heads, or these lightning bolts coming around the body, which I believe, just like Dave Talbot does, and Dave Talbot explained it to me, that what you're seeing here is you're seeing a depiction of what the new magnetic field, or the shifted magnetic field, the effect it had on humankind in that time period. So you're not seeing ancient aliens infiltrating the native peoples of Utah or Arizona or Colorado. What you're seeing is the effects of a magnetic shift on the remaining population, and that you're not seeing as many animals, because you were pointing out die-offs and species going and all this. it's the same thing, except we're not drawing on caves. We're seeing this in documentaries, National Geographic. We have people like you, Rob, who actually reports this stuff. And so this is how we're getting it. Yes, I mean, we have far less animals, species dying off, and soon it'll be us that will be subjected to whatever, whether it be a CME, coronal mass ejection, whether it'll be a EMP, or whether it be a full shift of the planet's magnetic field, because we know the magnetic field is weakening. I was reading the other day that there have been spikes in the Schumann resonance on the planet. So this means there's a correction going on, some sort of correction, and we may be a part of it or we may not. This correction may mean wiping out us or wiping out certain species. What do you say to that?
Yeah, it seems like the Earth has, I don't know if it's God or nature or what exactly it is, but there's some sort of reset mechanism that happens every, like I said, every extinction period that we know about, plus probably a lot more. And I think it's interesting that you were talking about like the magnetosphere changing here in the north. Like we're seeing in the area I'm in, we're right on the Canadian Shield. There's lots of rocks, so we have caribou and animals that kind of exist on the tundra. But what we're seeing now is we're seeing animals that lived in the south starting to migrate north, like deer, buffalo, various birds. We caught a beetle 2 summers ago. It was some sort of giant beetle. We thought it was like somebody escaped out of some freak show, but the thing was huge. It was like 6 inches long. But we went and looked it up, and this is a part of this changing electromagnetic sphere and the climate at the same time, where these animals are being drawn to safer regions in the planet. Now, if you go back and look at the work of Gordon Scallion and his map that he drew, if you look at how that all combines and you compare it with the migration patterns we're starting to see these animals take, it kind of looks like they're all getting into these spots that are supposed to be these safe zones. So I'm thinking the animals are the real key of watching. What they do is what we should be following.
Well, I remember back during the 2012 fears and the idea that the world was going to end on December 21st, 2012. And I know a lot of people are probably thinking that I was saying the world was going to end just like every other conspiracy theorist, because I analyze these things. I don't necessarily want you to believe them. I want you to consider some of the things that are being said. But one of the things I did say about 2012 is that my studies told me that it wasn't going to be the end of the world, but it was the beginning of something called the end of the cycle of creation, which is what the Mayans had said, and that the cycle of creation would immediately go in reverse. And this is why we're hearing things about men who are impotent. This is why we're hearing about men whose sperm count's going down. We're hearing about infertile women, and we're having things like Zika and other types of diseases that harm the embryo. And we have microencephaly. We have all these other problems. And what this is this is just another way of the planet to create this type of event, this extinction event. And we're in the middle of it. We don't realize that's what this is. And so the end of cycle of creation is happening all around us. We're seeing people dying at younger ages, which is terrifying for me, because I'm thinking to myself, how long do I have? I'm 53 years old. I've been through, 3 different cancer situations and, pulmonary problems and all kinds of things. And now I'm trying to recover. I've been doing this now for 2.5, 3 years, but it's difficult in such a toxic environment to do this. I was just reading the other day that regardless of the climate change scares and all this stuff, the toxicity of the air and the toxicity of the environment now is zapping nutrients out of the foods. And I've talked about this many times with longevity, because I partner with Doc Wallach, and I talk about, a lot of people in this genre partner up with Doc Wallach, because Wallach has all of these nutrient things that you can buy and use and make you feel better. But the thing is that it's showing more and more that the toxicity of the planet and some of the things that we take for granted that we don't even realize, like, for example, the what they call the oh, the electric fog. I don't know if you've heard of that, that the electric fog is killing us, that once we go from 4G to 5G,
Oh, yeah.
people are going to start losing their minds. And this is and you hear about what happened. I talked about this in my last show here on Cognitive Liberty. I talked about the Cuban situation where the diplomats were, something happened where they have brain damage and they have loss of hearing and they can't speak and they have vertigo and all this stuff. Well, you know, the United States is saying, well, this is some sort of technology that we're not familiar with. But on a more natural scale, and on a scale that I don't think people realize, is that there are things like, you know, this electronic fog that's been created with Wi-Fi, a number of other things that are happening that have no explanation. Where you wake up and you're like going, why do I feel so terrible? Why do I feel so exhausted? I was doing a study. I did a speech in San Francisco, and when I was in San Francisco, I did this analysis. Did you know that around the time that the geoengineering happened and the chemtrails were happening over the United States, energy drink sales went from nothing in 1998 to 500% sales? That for some reason, the energy drink market in the United States is soaring. How is it that with the right kind of sleep and the right kind of foods, people can't have energy, that they're completely drained of their energy? Something is causing us to have this energy drain, and it's either the food we eat or the environment we're in, and this is something that adds to the sixth extinction. What do you think of that?
I think it's a combination of our environment, the weird energy fields that we're just beginning to understand, and I think it's another thing that's going on is this. I don't know if it's a mass mental illness or whatever, that everybody seems to be under this impression that, you know, whatever I say is right and everybody else is wrong. And it's not so much the concepts behind it, but the actual energy that's flowing behind that. Everybody's angry at each other. They want to fight. It's argumentative. It's like there's something pushing us to, well, if you look at, say, here natural herds, how they thin themselves out when their numbers get too high. You know, like if there's too many rabbits in an area, you'll get an influx of wolves coming in to clean them out. And I'm starting to think that that's what, through nature, God, whatever you want to call it, that's what's pushing us. This is why we're seeing these weird anomalous energy things and people being so angry and then mass animal die-offs. It's basically what you said. What I did find interesting, you mentioned about the electric fog. You remember when the reporters a few years ago all started talking garbly gook on the TV? You know, the one lady that just went off and nobody ever gave us an explanation of it. And that's been my theory from day one, is that it was something electromagnetic that caused her brain just to kind of shut off.
Well, and I think that what isn't being told is that, well, I mean, she was doing a report at one of the award ceremonies, and she was a reporter out of California, and she said that she had a mini stroke, or she had some sort of migraine attack, a small ischemic attack that caused this. Well, what was interesting is that after her episode, there was another episode in Czechoslovakia. They had a reporter that had the same thing happen to her in Czechoslovakia, and Judge Judy from the Judge Judy show also had one of these attacks. And so we had this series of attacks, and then, of course, there were other reports of like kids at school that were having these attacks where they couldn't speak, they wouldn't be able to form sentences, and they wound up bedridden because they didn't have any sense of direction. So, you know, these things have been happening. People go into even what they call a form of epilepsy, where they black out and they don't know where they are, and they're lost, and they have to somehow, you know, they have to rest, and I don't know what it is, but people are suffering from these problems, and you can either say that either they're being targeted, which a lot of people believe they are being targeted, and they're having some sort of reaction to electromagnetic attacks or electromagnetic mind control, or perhaps the planet is going through some sort of spike and then some sort of down period of electromagnetic effect on people. And if you do some studying, you find out that when sun activity is happening, when we have these solar storms, that people with regular problems like bipolar and depression and all these other maladies that affect us mentally, it enhances them. And sometimes when these storms are so active, when the sun is so active, people are literally debilitated by this electromagnetic increase.
Well, during the last big one here a few weeks ago, when we had, right after it was all the hurricanes and earthquakes, which is another interesting thing. I suffer from anxiety. So I got 4 or 5 days straight of solid anxiety attacks. Couldn't figure out what was going on. Ended up, I take cannabis for anxiety medication, and I just upped my dosage for a few days, and it leveled me out, but I couldn't figure it out. Then I seen on the news about these solar storms, and I remember sitting on the couch talking to my wife and saying, yeah, you watch, in a few days we're going to have earthquakes, we're going to start seeing people freaking out over things, all of this stuff. And sure enough, it started happening.
Well, they don't mention enough the effects of electromagnetic current on the planet. And that's why when you get into things like the HARP project, you get into things by ionospheric heating. Even Michio Kaku says they're firing energy weapons into the skies in hopes that they can control the weather. You control the weather with electromagnetic currents, and you change the electrojet, or you change the jet stream, and you change the direction of storms. People feel it. We're affected by it. And when we see these images of destroyed islands like the Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico, we're affected by it because, we're seeing something, and that is we're seeing indications that the earth is ending, that the world is ending. When you see destruction like this, the mind responds to the idea, this could be me. And even though you don't react that way outwardly, inside you're holding in this anxiety, and it's being multiplied by the way the electronic fog is increasing. And you get a little something called cytokine inflammation. I've talked about cytokine inflammation before. Is the body, because of the toxicity and the magnetic toxicity and the other toxins in the air, we are responding with something called cytokine inflammation. The body, everyone has it, and they get it. And when they do, they don't understand why they feel depressed one day, or they feel tired and sluggish one day, or they're just not, the pistons aren't firing properly. It's because something in the body is swelling up. The brain center is saying, something's wrong with me. But all it is the body is somehow responding to this type of electromagnetic, stimulation or whatever's going on. And that's the thing, is that pretty soon we're going to have to maybe open, and I don't know, so we'll get the idea now, I'm sure. But we open up these isolation areas where you just go in, and it's all about isolating yourself from electromagnetic currents and 4G, 5G, internet, Wi-Fi, all this electronic fog that's making us feel tired and kind of sluggish.
Well, and it's kind of like that saying, the prison planet. That's basically what they've done with this electromagnetic grid over the years. I remember when I was going to college taking application programming that, I had a teacher that told us about echelon. And that he had worked on echelon. This was 1993, so this was long before a lot of conspiracy theorists had information on it. So it was interesting when I actually read it on the internet. I was like, well, I know about that. Anyway, he was talking then about these cell phone towers and the other things that they could do.
Gwen towers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
And aggravate people, cause riots, all this stuff. Where was it? Somewhere in Maine. I believe it was during the 70s. They were practicing, the U.S. military was using this on a civilian population. There was a town that they turned this box on, this electromagnetic box. Suddenly, murders, aggravated assaults, all these violent crimes skyrocketed. And I'm sure they've tested it a lot since then.
Well, and we were talking. I had Alana Freeland on last episode of this program, and we were talking about Eugene, Oregon, and the woodpecker, and the testing that was done that was pretty much torture that was being carried out by the Russians on the United States, and people were feeling sick, they were feeling odd, they were feeling anxious, and there were so many logical explanations that the technocrats were like pushing out. And people had to be satisfied with this because there was no other explanation. But finally, somebody decides, well, we're going to declassify you and tell you that we're going to declassify all this. We're going to tell you that, well, what's going on is the Russians are sending a signal that's a pulse, and that pulse is making you feel weird. And, and it's always the same every time. We all have this unexplained way of feeling. People say, oh, it's all mental illness. Mm-hmm. And then we find out that it's not mental illness. Somebody is actually invading our heads. Someone is actually trying to bring us down mentally, and they're trying to confuse us. And it's like I was saying last night when I talked about this whole psyop of the taking a knee in the NFL. I mean, I know you're in Canada.
Yeah. Oh, we were more than aware of it.
Yeah. And it's so, and I don't want to ruin anybody's feeling about the flag or about the national anthem or anything. But, even when I told my audience, I said, you realize that this is a well-designed, agitated propaganda scheme. It's a strategy of tension scheme, and it's a psyop to get the people to react in this way, to divide them even more. And it didn't matter. They wanted to get their opinion out about who's right and who's wrong here. But then when you tell them $54 million goes into these displays every time they bring out the flag or they have the players stand at attention, that's your money going into the NFL, your tax dollars going into the NFL so the Department of Defense can recruit kids to be in the military. Mm-hmm. Now, people will say, well, what's wrong with them being in the military? Well, nothing really, because the military makes men. They do well with young people, and they get them on their way. But the wars we're fighting now we're told they're wars to protect our freedoms, but in reality, they're wars to protect the politicians and their policies and their lack of diplomacy. Mm-hmm. So we're getting this brainwashing of bumper sticker jingoism and bumper sticker patriotism that I find embarrassing. I said, look, the American flag is not a trademark or a brand, and the national anthem is not a jingle, yet the Department of Defense treats it like it's one. And so you should be more angry about that, I think. And that's why, the whole problems of race and division and all this, we were discussing, when did this happen? When did this timeline start again, where we all become hateful, and everybody who's, white or white supremacists and all this rhetoric and this propaganda that, and even those who are pushing this propaganda, I had a discussion with a friend of mine about this. It's all about, this uppity liberal neoliberalism that's pushing this agenda, and many of them have never stepped foot in a black neighborhood or in a neighborhood with Latinos that are begging for money, that are begging to get their cities or their areas rebuilt, replenished, and creating a better place for them to live. At least a place where they can have libraries instead of strip clubs and things like that. And I shake my head and I say to myself, if they really, really cared, they would go in and they would do something. But right now, it's just all lip service. It's all to make them look good. And in the meantime, the people are divided and they're ready to kill each other. Another indication, as you say, that we're also tormented, that we want to just up and kill each other, and it doesn't matter anymore because we're in this sixth extinction level thought process. What I call the paradigm is the traumatic paradigm is what we're in right now. It's traumatic. It's response to traumatic activities that are going on around us.
Well, it's like we got PTSD from the world, right?
Yeah.
Like, everything.
Dissociative disorder from the world, really.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like the more. One of the exercises I've tried to follow in the last 6 months was turn off the news. All I do now is like I'll open up Google News and I'll read through the headlines, and that's usually where I leave it. Or I'll listen to podcasts like Ground Zero or whatever to get my information from. And suddenly I stopped being so angry, stopped being so scared, and I kind of got a better perspective on what's going on in the world. And I think some of the aggravation that we're seeing with Black Lives Matter and the Antifa and alt-right and all these other organizations is being pushed by the media. It was nothing to begin with, but they've given it life. Yeah. It's like racism. I have a really good friend of mine. Some of your audience might know him as Mr. Gates. He's an author, did an amazing audiobook called Jupiter. recommend everybody go look it up. But we were talking about, he's black. He lives in Las Vegas. He's, been in downtown Compton, like he's lived the life. And like he said, it's like, I don't really have any problems with the cops. He gets pulled over. He's polite. He answers the questions. That's not to say that, it happens to everybody like that. But he said out of his 40-some years of living on this planet, he's never had one incident where a cop's been racist or aggressive just because of the color of his skin. But if you watched it on the media, you would think that every black person in America has had that happen to them. And that's what they want. They want everybody to be so aggravated and so scared we're not paying attention to what they're doing, which brings us back to the sixth extinction. I think they're getting off the planet.
Well, yeah, that's true. I did a study. I read a study that stated that only 9% of the people of the United States identify with white supremacy, KKK, and Nazism. 9%. Yeah. Now that's about 150 million people. That's a lot of people. It's like when you look at the statistics about Islam, you say, well, 2% of Islam hates the United States, and that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And you can't necessarily differentiate because Americans have a hard time differentiating. So we just throw it all together as radical Islamic terrorism rather than Wahhabist extremism, which is exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. And the same thing goes for all of this. Paying attention to the extremists, giving them a platform, and then saying that platform goes all the way to the President of the United States. It basically removes credibility. It removes the dignity and respect that you give to the presidency of the United States of America. It basically undermines government, and it's a threat to national security. Mm-hmm. The impunity that went on before President Trump became the president of the United States was something to discuss. I had a discussion today with a judge, a retired judge, and he says there are two things that when we bring up the atrocities that are happening now in the United States, I don't know exactly what atrocities that are happening. Most of the atrocities are happening with our failed diplomacy in Europe and all those places. And even Canada, I understand. I mean, even England and Canada we're kind of iffy with them now because of trade wars and problems. But he was telling me, he said that why don't we ever bring up the fact that, the surveillance state had its roots, or at least it expanded itself during the Obama administration. And for the first time in the history of the United States of America, an American citizen was murdered with a drone. Mm-hmm. And no one remembers that. It was under the direction of President Obama. Now, we can excuse that, right? We can excuse all that horrible, and we can excuse the impunity of other politicians like Hillary Clinton. Why? Because of party loyalty and identity politics. Identity politics are killing us. Because if you have identity politics, if politics are the only thing that rule your life, and if you feel that you criticize anything within the body politic, you feel like you're destroying your loyalty to a party, you're a moron. I think you've lost your mind. Because, anymore, I see myself as a citizen that can look both ways when crossing the street, look both ways before I make a political statement. But it doesn't matter what I say. If it leans political, which everything is political now in the United States, even your pain is political. Mm-hmm. These are the things that bother me, is that, people don't realize that having politics in everything is the very thing that nurtured Nazism and fascism. Was that, look, you separate the politics from the religion. That doesn't exist anymore. The Pope is more political now than he's ever been. Religious people are more political now than they've ever been. If you're a Christian, you have to be a conservative, right? And liberals are never Christian enough for the conservatives. So it's basically a matter of sectarianism, the kind of sectarianism that happens in the Middle East, but it's not religious, it's political. And as I said earlier, everything's political. The people you sleep with, it's political. The people you marry, it's political. The ideas you have for religion are political. And as I said, your pain is political. Why? Because it's the argument as to how you get rid of that pain in your life. Whether it's you take the opioids and get addicted, or you use the marijuana and face jail time in places where it's illegal. Mm-hmm. This is an insane world, and there's no doubt that this is, creating this confusion. And when Americans, maybe even Canadians, people in general, when they're confused, they do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They just stand there like cows reading a dictionary. They don't know what to do.
Well, I mean, Canada's a prime example. We elected Justin Trudeau here 2 years ago. Since he's come into power, during the election, he sounded great. He sounded like the guy. Like he was talking about legalizing marijuana. He wanted to cut back on taxes. He wanted to put some spending back into infrastructure. He wanted to, have everybody be nice to each other. But as soon as he took power, we seen the other side of Justin Trudeau, which was the leftists, everything's sunshine, but really it's just a way of getting people to fight. And since he's come into power, I've never seen Canada so divided. Like we were always from coast to coast. I've hitchhiked from one side of the country to the other, and it's always we're Canadians, except for Quebec, but that's another story.
Yeah, you guys were always nice. I mean,
exactly.
You're the nice country. You're the country that when you bump into furniture, you apologize to the sofa. That's
exactly. We're always saying I'm sorry for
now
something.
You guys are all pissed off of the world. You're not happy Canadians anymore. No. I see it. I understand what you're saying, and in Quebec too. I understand what you're saying. Yeah. Anyway, we have our problems too. I would say that yes, the division is a part of the psyop. It is the idea that if we can take peaceful countries or relatively peaceful and productive countries and destabilize them, they'll be begging for control of a world government. And that's the whole idea. If you destabilize one particular way of living, if you take away sovereignty, if you take away a lifestyle, if you remove things that most generations are comfortable with, and that's the thing, is that I never thought I'd see the day. I mean, I'm older than you are, and I'm beginning to see things where, I always said to myself, I'll never be that old man. I'll never be that old man. Yeah. I won't be like my dad. I won't be like that at all. And I'm not like my dad, okay? I'm more open to things. And, I'm still a rocker at 53 years old, right? And I'm aware of the music that my stepson listens to and what my son listens to. Mm-hmm. I'm aware of all of it. But, the thing that I never thought I'd see is I'd be the old man when it comes to things like Constitution. I'd be the old man when it comes to things like national anthem and flag. But I'm also a sensible old man in a lot of ways, because I just don't think that we should give in to these psychological operations that basically step or actually push the buttons of all the emotional things that we're afraid of. I mean, it's just it's the flavor of the week, and I mean that W-E-A-K. It's the flavor of the week, the very weak, who can't handle the future, and it's future shock, and it's all those things coming at once, and we have to understand what it is without fighting amongst each other. Otherwise, it's exactly what they want. If they see it as a division, look what we do to the other countries that we say don't have fair elections. If we can prove that we don't have fair elections here in the United States or in Canada, that's a signal for NATO or the UN to walk in and say, oh, by the way, we're coming in here and we're making sure this works. Or the United Nations, we're coming here and we're going to make sure that Canada has fair elections. We're going to come in and make sure that the United States has elections that are not being infiltrated by Russian conspiracy. I mean, these are things that, they're just so over the top that Americans, Canadians, and even Europeans just don't stop for a moment and think, do you realize how much money has gone into these programs to basically screw with your head? It's all about the agitprop, the agitated propaganda. It worked with communism. It'll work with whatever they're proposing now.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's George Soros's playbook, right? Yeah. Come in, give all these people money, get them outraged, get them up on their pulpits, get the people around them outraged, and then while your two sides are dividing farther and farther apart, those of us in the center are begging for a solution. And as the center gets bigger, the closer the solution gets. And when the center is big enough, they're going to give us a solution, and it's going to be a solution that is agreeable to the right and the left. But in reality, I think it's going to really screw over the rest of the freedom of humanity. I mean, we've talked before about the technical police grid that's going on here. If we lose freedom this time, that's it. We don't get it back.
No, we don't.
Ancient Egypt, yeah, we could get it back. Roman times, we could get it back. Now, if they implement this technical police state that they want to implement, we'll never get it back because there will never be a chance for us to fight back.
The sad thing is that a lot of Americans believe that it is inevitable. A lot of Americans believe in the militarized police forces. Americans believe that they have a drug cartel Mexican waiting in the wings to kill their families. I mean, these are things that we get pumped into our heads every day. It's xenophobia. It's good xenophobia because people are buying into it. You know, we worry about immigration. There's a reason to worry about immigration, especially when you're talking about immigration from places like Syria and other places in the Middle East. We go in there, we bomb the hell out of their homes, and we torture their families, and then we expect to not have a number of them come over into our country and decide that they're just going to have some revenge kick. I mean, that's the only reason why I fear it. And I'm not, you know, I'm not going to, you know, I'm not going to say that I don't believe that we should have vetted immigration. Sure, people can come to my country and they can have the opportunities that I have. But man, we need to be very careful about how we feel and how we're so happy to have everybody come in and everything, because there are people that are out there that just want to watch the world burn. And that's from everybody. That's white, black, Middle Eastern, Muslim, Jew, you name it. We are all subjected to these maniacs and sociopaths and these narcissistic psychopaths that are running government today. And I think we need to be aware. And that's why I wanted to, as we close, getting closer to the end time of this this broadcast, I want to ask about FreeJack TV and what exactly that is.
Well, FreeJack TV, what we, as you know, we started the conspiracy channel 4 years ago. It's growing, lots of great films up there, conspiracychannel.net, shameless plug. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to take and expand that, get something bigger, start bringing in more people. Because one of the biggest problems we have as alternative media personalities is getting the tools we need to build networks. Like most people don't know how to set up an internet TV network. Most people don't know how to set up an internet radio station. So what we wanted to do is bring everybody together and give them these tools without the censorship that comes with being on YouTube or some of the other platforms. So with FreeJack, right now we've got the conspiracy channel is a channel on FreeJack. We're bringing on Dark Space TV, which is our sci-fi horror network. And soon, we haven't decided on a name, but we're going to be doing a comedy network. So we're going to have all three. FreeJack TV, you can watch everything for free on the website. You can watch it on the apps, whatever. But the big thing is what the last time I was on Ground Zero, we were talking about the censorship in the media that was going on with YouTube and all these other, Facebook and all these platforms. And I really got the urge that, hey, you know, I've got the abilities. I'm going to start building some of the stuff to let other alternative media personalities help build their networks and whatnot, help get that information out there without the censorship. So that's what FreeJack is. We're looking into some really advanced stuff like decentralized video broadcasting, where they could never pull the videos off the internet. They will always exist out there. You will always have access to them. So yeah, it's a really cool project.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of projects. I know Liberty Beacon is a project that is most certainly. I'm very surprised at how many people are actually supporters of Liberty Beacon, because they get the idea that, you know, there needs to be networks out there that they can rely on. You know, we have to, you know, go through the YouTube processes and the social media processes and all this, but eventually we have to find ourselves being independent, because, you know, somebody had compared, you know, social media to internet colonies. And if that's the case, then there need to be colonial, I guess you could call it resistance, where we're tired of being part of the colonies. We want to be part of an independent move. So it's like the same type of history, except on the internet. The colonies were created by the technocrats, the CIA, the alphabet agencies, Google, Facebook, Twitter. and then an Instagram and all these other things that are basically part of this this infrastructure. But then, of course, you need to have a number of revolutionaries who say, well, now we're going to be there are independent states, and the independent states are things like Liberty Beacon and FreeJack and Conspiracy Channel and all these other groups, because that's how cable started.
Mm-hmm.
Cable started that way, and then we had MTV, and we had History Channel. We had all these other channels. Cable TV is still cable TV, but there's so much variety now out there that you can get a lot of information with variety. And I think that's important. That keeps us from, being part of this programmed, 5 network owned by 5 different, conglomerates that want to push an issue or an agenda. And that's the problem, is there's too many agendas, and then there are too many fragmented broadcasters out there that they're just doing it for the click, and instead of doing it for the seriousness of what it is that we're doing, and that is enlightening people and open people's minds to new ideas, because the mind now is what's the most important. I mean, they're exploring ways to change the mind or manipulate the mind. They want to fingerprint, they say, the brain, and they already have the power now to hook the brain up to the internet and have the brain work the internet, and it's all part of the transhumanistic move. And transhumanism will have its benefits, but then when they start saying we're going to convert completely over, this is another part of it, the extinction level. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting move going there with Ray Kurzweil and that whole transhuman thing, where my grandparents were very religious when I was a kid, and I never really put much stock into it. And the older I get, the more religious I find I'm being. But I remember about them talking about in prophecy that at some point Satan, Lucifer, was going to destroy the image of man. And when I start seeing people wanting to implant themselves with these devices to open doors and stuff, it's like it's the first little step towards this. Just get rid of man, because man's imperfect, man's flawed. So let's just get rid of it. We'll build something new, and we'll jump in that and fly through the stars because we'll live forever. And all these utopian ideas that we all know how utopia usually turns out. So I don't know who's pushing it, but man, if there is a Lucifer or a demon or whatever controlling evil, I really have to wonder after seeing the transhumanist thing.
Well, and of course, it's been said many times that one of the biggest objectives of alchemy, the magicians, were to create what is known as a secret chief, or one that will do the bidding of the master. So if you can't do that to a human being through slavery, you can do that with something you created. And many times we've had these stories of the golem. We've had these stories of Frankenstein, which, of course, Frankenstein is German for man of stone. The man of stone is the golem. Frankenstein's monster is the golem. Creating a mechanical golem is the objective.
Far off.
It's the idea. It's not far off. And the idea has gone all the way back to the ancient Greeks. When you go back to talk about Talos and what Talos did, he basically guarded the island of Crete. He was a robot. So there's always been the idea that man would someday create his own automaton that would do his bidding. But what they don't count on, and what they are thinking about now, is how the automaton will be able to reproduce and eventually phase out mankind, meaning wiping him out and creating a whole new species, basically an extinction level event.
I think you might be dead on to something. I'll leave you with this, Clyde. If there was a Satan, this overarching evil entity that just has total hatred for mankind, and he's out there in some sort of dimension, and he needed to get into this dimension, if we built him a big worldwide computer that's connected to everything, would he not control the world if he transferred himself into it?
Oh, sure.
Interesting.
They call that a singularity, right?
Yeah.
the ghost in the machine. And what is that ghost? Is it going to be something that is going to be organized and for humankind, or is it going to be perverse, and is it going to want to destroy humankind? There are many things, I believe, that are putting us on the edge. And even Elon Musk said, when you're providing yourself with unlimited access to artificial intelligence, you're actually releasing the demon. And I think we need to listen to that. I mean, all things can be used to our benefit, but once they're used to bring down man or destroy man, it becomes a demon against man. So yes, your Lucifer idea most certainly is affected here. It's a part of the future. It's a part of what we fear, and if we draw that to us, and if we continue to keep pushing the envelope, we will find ourselves in a situation where we will destroy ourselves, and there will be another civilization there to witness it. Mm-hmm. And the Earth will still be here, but many of us will not. And the culling process we heard, the idea of eliminating 2/3 of the population and all this, it'll come true because we have allowed it. We've allowed it to transpire, and we have not fought hard enough to keep, people sane and sound and safe. And I think that's very important. Once again, FreeJack TV. How does one get involved with watching it? How does one get involved with participating in it? Is there a fee? What exactly do you have to do to be a part of it?
Okay, so if you want to watch on your computer, just go over to freejack.tv. You can watch everything there for free online. Now, if you have an internet TV device like a Roku, Amazon Fire Stick, or an Android TV, you can just go to our website, conspiracychannel.net, click the install app button for your device, and it will install the app on your Roku, Google TV, and Amazon TV, and you can just load it up and start watching right away. We do have a fee if you want to watch without ads. It's $5.99 a month, or you can watch 100% free with just a few ads every 15 minutes, I think it is. So all kinds of free stuff. We just topped 200 films, so we got new stuff being added every week. We've got a lot of new content producers coming online soon, so yeah, it's pretty cool to watch.
Do you have any other private projects you're working on at the moment?
I've got 3 films in production at once, so I'm trying to decide which one I'm going to go ahead with. I've got a prophecy one. I've got one dealing with the technology that we were just talking about, and another one that I'm kind of working on social justice warriors. But
I'm thinking if your prophecy one is about the end of the world, you can probably put it off for another, a couple of years.
Yeah. The 23rd went by and I didn't have the film done, but hey.
Yeah, I tried to get the guy on my show. He says, "Can I book? Can you book me next week?" I said, "Come on." What is it, David Mead? I called David Mead. I was like, "Hey, come on, we got to do this before 20. Just call me next week."
Yeah. I got some checks to cash.
I got checks to cash, people to meet. And he did postpone the date, by the way. Now it's October, I believe, October the 13th or something. Friday the 13th, 100th anniversary of Fatima. Damn right the world's going to end, I'll tell you.
Harold Camping would be happy. That? Harold Camping would be so happy.
Yes, good old Harold Camping. He's dead now.
Yes.
The world did come to an end for him. He's now with Hugh Hefner.
Well, he called it right.
Anyway, thank you, Rob. Rob Davenport, FreeJack TV, and several other wonderful projects. It's so great to have you on this program, Cognitive Liberty, and hope to see you soon. Take care.
Okay, take care.